Well, hello there. Thank you guys so much for joining us today here on the Revival Center YouTube page. We count it a privilege and an honor every time that you join us on any of our media content in any capacity of our services or our teaching time. So thank you guys so very much. If you have not liked this video, go ahead and like it real quick. Go ahead and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you guys for subscribing. I'll tell you, that has just continued to grow and grow over the last several months and last several years, really. And I was, again, very thankful for that. It's a free way, it's an easy way in order to get this content out there. So thank you guys for making that so successful. Today is part 3. We're going to jump right into it on this live session. And remember, whenever you're watching this live, Aaron Limbaugh is behind the camera and behind the computer. So if you would like to get in the chat session and ask a question or talk to him in any capacity to communicate with us, we would love to connect with you in this media forum. With that being said, this is part 3 of this teaching series that we've been doing on alcohol and the church's response to it, and how are we to walk through that and navigate that. What does the Bible say about alcohol? Should we abstain or should we do it in moderation? What is the stance? And obviously there are different components to that. I recognize that this is a controversial topic, but it's one that I'm not scared to talk about, obviously. I've been talking about it now for 3 weeks. But so I'm not to repeat what I've already said in part 1 and part 2, but kind of as we get into this last session and this conclusion of this teaching, just remember, keep some things in mind, that I do approach this subject from a very personal standpoint, that I've had negative experiences with alcohol growing up in my family. Many of you that watch this and follow the Revival Center know my story growing up, and nothing positive in my life was ever associated with alcohol. Everything negative in my life was associated with alcohol growing up. I was raised in an alcoholic family. I was raised with drugs and alcohol from the age of 0 all the way to about 12 or 13, 14 years old. So my life consisted of a lot of negativity due, in my opinion, to alcohol, because the people who were abusive, the people who, put fear in our family, things like that. I love these people. They were my family, dad, aunts, uncles, everybody. So I know that it wasn't their heart, but it was the effects of drugs or alcohol that created these negative circumstances. In fact, alcoholism runs in my family. So my grandfather on my mom's side essentially died of alcoholism in his 50s. I never knew him. He died way before I was born. But he drank himself to death, basically. So this subject is very personal to me. And I would abstain from alcohol whether I was saved or not. So you do need to know that about me as I approach this subject. Meaning, I'm not hard to convince that you don't need to drink, is my point. The second thing that you need to remember as we get into this, again, I'm kind of repeating myself from the last episodes, is I don't think it's a sin if someone drinks a beer or drinks a glass of wine, okay? We're not condemning anyone. So understand that about this subject. However, I do think if you're going to be in ministry, if you're going to be in leadership, then I do believe there's a different standard for that individual. I do believe that. So much so that you can't serve on staff here at this church or be in leadership at a high level in this church if you consume alcohol, especially if I find out about it. Now, I don't want to know. I don't go and search people's Facebook page and dig in people's trash to try to find out what they're doing. I don't want to know in that aspect. However, if it does come to my attention, it is going to be addressed, because there is a certain standard that I believe that the Scriptures do speak about in terms of leadership. And so I do make that demarcation. And so does the fellowship that I'm a part of, that we are a part of. The Assemblies of God takes a stand of abstinence whenever it comes to leadership and consuming alcohol. So you do need to keep those things in mind. And then number 3, the reason I wanted to teach on this is because I saw a video of a pastor who was preaching and teaching on this subject. And he stood up in his pulpit and he said, and I have the video on my phone, so what I'm telling you, if you want to come and ask me about this, I'll show it to you, if you come to church here on the side. But he was in his pulpit and he stood up as he's preaching on this subject. He said, my favorite place is to be at the beach. And if you came and saw me at the beach with my wife, what you would find is a Bible in one hand and a beer in another hand. And whenever I saw that, my spirit grieved inside of me. That is not something that I celebrate. That is not something that I look at as wow, this man has really figured out, the truth of this subject. I grieved in my spirit. I grieved because whenever you are promoting drinking in this capacity, the way he was in his congregation, I know for a fact, due to Teen Challenge, due to people being delivered out of drugs and alcohol, I know for a fact, due to counseling sessions that I have done where infidelity came into that marriage, not because the husband or the wife was a bad person, but because alcohol was introduced, made them have bad decisions. I know for a fact of the funerals that I have done due to DUIs and drinking under the influence, that the promotion of a pastor to do that in his pulpit is going to have a negative consequence on a 15-year-old teenager or a 20-year-old or a 30-year-old or a 40-year-old who struggles with addiction and alcoholism. I know that it's going to have a negative effect. You don't even have to convince me of that. I just know that. That's the reason I was grieved, because I think that is so irresponsible. So what I say is, if you come to the beach and you find me at the beach, what you're going to find is a Bible in one hand and water in the other hand, and we're just going to be enjoying God's creation in being sober-minded, and making sure that we're just having a good time without having to be introduced to any kind of foreign substance. Now, I will drink coffee, okay? So if you want to criticize me on that, I do drink coffee a lot. But anyways, the other reason I wanted to go down this subject is because of this right here. You can find this article on the Christian Post here. So I come across this article because of the Mike Bickle situation that has been happening at IHOP, Kansas City. If you've been following that, then you understand the fallout that has happened with Mike Bickle and the sexual deviancies and the extramarital affairs that have happened, and just it's a whole thing that is taking place. He stepped down. They're no longer praying 24 hours a day, 7 days a week anymore as a result. But this came up in the process of all of those other things. And what this article is Misty Edwards was accused now of having an affair with another Kevin, I don't know his last name, another worship leader there, having an affair with this man that has now come up. She's denied it. You can go and read the article. I'm not throwing no stones. The reason I'm bringing it up in the subject of alcohol is because as you read this and as you study this, what happened in this particular news article is that Misty Edwards and this other man was caught driving under the influence of alcohol. And they were arrested. They had a DUI because they were intoxicated. And this is not hearsay. There's an official report. There was a body cam for it. Everything is right there, so it's public knowledge. But the point of me bringing that up is oftentimes when you see a ministry leader who advocates drinking in a very public way, or alcohol is involved in that ministry of some shape, form, or fashion, there's a lot of times other things going on that you may not realize is happening. And that's the case there with Mike Bickle. Missy Edwards was not asked to step down because that happened like in 2017, 2018. And she continued to serve and continued to lead worship. at IHOP, while at the same time, behind the scenes, there was a massive controversy brewing right up under the surface. Again, a lot of times, wherever you see alcohol being embraced in a ministry of some sort, there's other little things going on around it. And I'm just making that observation. So let's bring some basic conclusions to the teachings of the last 2 weeks. The historical commitment of the Assemblies of God to abstain is well founded biblically and ethically. So what we've tried to do in this teaching is show the Scripture's overwhelming negative view of what the text clearly defines as a beverage with high alcohol content. And you have to remember, I'm repeating myself, a little redundancy here, that the strongest drink possible in the biblical times was not a modern fortified wine of 14 to 20% alcohol content, much less the strong whiskey that is available today of 40 to 50% alcohol content. The alcohol content of biblical times is not the same as the alcohol content of modern times. And that is fact, that is not fiction. You see, back then, the natural fermented wine or beer would have had a possible alcohol content of 10 to 11%, which is actually less than the basic wines that you would drink today. The strongest drink back then. The common process of diluting fermented wine, which could produce a beverage that would have been categorized as a sub-alcoholic drink by today's standard. So a lot of the stuff, like when Jesus turned the water into wine, and you read these types of things, what they were drinking probably wouldn't even really be considered wine today, because the alcohol content would be so low, and the fact that they would dilute the wine to make it last longer back in those days as well, because they were not drinking it in the same capacity in which people drink it today. They were not drinking it down at the beach with the Bible in one hand and a beer in another hand. That wasn't the point of them consuming it. They were consuming what they had to consume at that time. The water was not very good. I mean, you drank what you had access to, but the purpose of it wasn't to get drunk. Now, there were people who drank it to get drunk, and the Bible absolutely forbids drunkenness. I mean, so those who consumed the wine and the beer and the strong drink back then for the purpose of getting blasted and for the purpose of getting drunk was considered a sin. As all agree, drunkenness is always condemned in the Scripture. You see the biblical accounts of Noah and his sons, Lot and his daughters vividly show that intoxication often leads to tragic ends. God pronounces woes to those who run after their strong drink and are inflamed by wine. Drunkenness is listed by the Apostle Paul among the acts of the flesh. And he declares that drunkenness will keep one from inheriting the kingdom of God. That's Paul saying that, not myself. He reminds the Corinthian believers that some of them were drunkards before they were washed and justified by Christ, implying that such behavior is to cease after salvation. The Apostle Peter contrasts living the new life in Christ with running with former companions in drunken, wild living. Drunkenness never has God's approval and is always a potential outcome of alcohol consumption. There are specific dangers inherent in alcohol against which the Bible gives clear warning. Again, I'm being a little bit redundant here, but we're about to bring this to a close. Alcohol tends to alter one's judgment. Okay, that is so very true. Frequently brings woe, sorrow, and strife into relationships, and it can cause physical harm. It can lower one's inhibitions, leading to shameful behavior, loose speech, sexual deviancies, and violence. Alcohol is a mocker, a deceiver that leads people astray. It goes down smoothly, but in the end it bites like a snake and poisons like a viper. That's the book of Proverbs. So deceptive is that one tends at first not to even realize the harm that it is doing. While the scriptures approvingly recount the stories of different individuals and groups who abstained from alcohol, they especially set a high standard for spiritual leaders. Again, when you look at the Old Testament priest, drinking wine while serving in the tabernacle was forbidden. You had the vow of the Nazarites not to drink wine. And you have the examples of John the Baptist and Timothy, who showed that they did not drink wine, and they all had a deep spiritual significance for today's modern viewpoint of how to address this subject. Abstinence is relevant to the whole priesthood of believers. Those involved in the holy calling of ministry bear a special responsibility, an example of those that are under our care. In instructing his co-workers, Timothy and Titus, on the appointment of elders, Paul emphasized to both that Christian leaders are not to be given to drunkenness. They are not to be consumers of wine and strong drink. The Greek noun that Paul uses there actually denotes one who is given to drinking too much wine, hence addicted to alcohol or drunkenness. Obviously, this is an area in which the Christian leader must exercise great discipline, setting a good example for all believers to follow and non-believers to respect. And that's the reason that moderation is such an elusive term, because you're not even dealing with the same substance. The substance that they were dealing with in the Bible times, quite often what you would refer to as wine wouldn't even show up on today's radar as an alcohol beverage. And so it convolutes the subject because you're not talking about the same thing. But moderation is sometimes that the mediator of trying to find common ground with those who want to drink, with those who don't want to drink. Well, you should be moderate. You should be considerate. But moderation is often something that is an elusive standard. The New Testament does not advocate moderate drinking. It doesn't give you rules of what a moderate drink is. It doesn't explain how one is to know when moderation is being practiced. Paul doesn't say, listen, Timothy, you can drink 2 glasses of wine. That's it. Anything beyond 2 is no longer moderate. There's nothing like that. There's no formula for it. It's an elusive standard. There is no universal definition of moderation. And so therefore the term is highly subjective. What one person considers moderate, another may view it as heavy drinking. And because it's all subjective. Even with well-intentioned and more disciplined practices of moderation, each user is going to respond differently to alcohol. In other words, what today's blood alcohol concentration is considered to be drunk is 0.08. However, someone with a blood alcohol content of 0.02 could have adverse effects in their thinking, even though they have not met the standard of what we consider drunk today, because it's all subjective. Whenever I was in 7th grade, my mom was picking myself up and my friend Jimmy Lunsford up from a basketball game in New Brockton. On our way home, we were coming around at like a little small curve and little hill right there in town, and there was someone driving on the wrong side of the road. This person hit us head-on, car collision. In fact, you can still see the scars on my forehead today as a result. This was a major car accident. The person who hit us actually died instantly in the car crash. My mom broke her right leg, her femur. So today, this happened in 1991, 1992. And so even today in 2024, my mom has a fake rod in her leg. She has no bone in her right leg. It's a rod. They had to take her bone out and put a rod in. My friend Jimmy has a huge scar on his right head that you can't see it unless he shaves his head. And then, of course, my face got all messed up. But I think it actually made me look a little bit better anyways. But the other person died instantly. And you know why? You know why he was driving on the wrong side of the road? Is because he was a drunk driver, ladies and gentlemen. His blood alcohol content was way over the limit, but he would have told you, moderation, moderation, don't be judging me, moderation. He lost his life and he almost took out 3 other innocent people who were just trying to come home from a basketball game. This is how I approach this subject from a very personal standpoint. The Navy and the Marine Corps' Public Health Center points out that alcoholism is not defined by what you drink, when you drink it, or even how much you drink. It's the effects of your drinking that define a problem. It's the effects. It's not how much or when or what, but it's what it does to you is how they approach this subject. So one person may use alcohol many times with seemingly no ill effects, while another may overdose or become addicted only after a few drinks. One should also keep in mind the genetic pull towards alcoholism that seems to be inherent. So you can actually begin to trace this down through the generations of people's lives, that moderate drinking is naive if you fail to recognize the peril of addiction for themselves or who they influence, because there seems to be a propensity in people's lives through the generations that if your grandfather was an alcoholic, if your father was an alcoholic, you better not be drinking, because chances are the past is a representative of the future, and there's something inside of you that pulls you towards addiction. And that's who I am. That's who I am. That's the reason I am totally against it, 100%, because I can look around the people in my family and I can see they all drink, friend. They are all pulled towards that. And I know that if I ever go down that road, my moderation is not going to be good. And the person that is standing before you right now on this YouTube channel will not be the same person if I ever go down that road. And so I recognize that. So the whole moderation thing for me, especially when it comes to leadership, is a non-starter. So those who champion moderation often do so in the name of Christian liberty. However, the Apostle Paul twice reminds us that though all things may be permissible to us, not everything is beneficial or constructive. Our choice of an action is not to be based simply on it being allowed, but on whether it edifies. Some Corinthian believers thought they were spiritual because of knowledge they claimed to have, and thought all believers should have the basis for Christian behavior. They thought such knowledge builds up. Instead, Paul told them that sometimes knowledge puffs up and destroys others because of this special privilege that you have. Rather than being spiritual, it leads to sinful pride. The Christian ethic of love always builds up and seeks the advantage of another. However, in doing so, the one who loves is also built up in the process. True Christian liberty knows the joy to honor one another above yourself. Christian liberty is the freedom to do the good things and to demonstrate spiritual authority. So think about it like this also in this same reference. Children, especially who often experience peer pressure to experiment with alcohol beginning in their preteens and high school, they need the loving counter-influence of parents, which is the number one influencer on their decision about alcohol. In other words, if you are a social drinker in your house, and then your 16-year-old is given an opportunity to drink alcohol at a party someplace, chances are, because they have seen it displayed in their house, that 16-year-old is like, yeah, mama and daddy does it, give me one, because of the influence that is happening in that household. Studies report that 1 in 4 children who began using any addictive substance, including alcohol, before the age of 18 become addicted. That's where addictions usually happen, is in the teenage years. Also think about this whenever you're thinking about how God is leading you in this. Listen to this scripture, Romans 14:21. It is better not to eat meat or drink wine or to do anything else that would cause your brother or sister to fall. In his letter to the Romans and to the Corinthian churches, the Apostle Paul instructs us and writes nearly 3 chapters to explain that even though believers may have a personal understanding of things permissible to God, they must not allow that understanding to cause other believers or sisters to stumble and fall due to your freedom that you have to pursue one of these certain things that we're discussing here. Others may be endangered by following a respected believer's example of moderation that unintentionally becomes harmful and destructive to them. Again, remember, I don't think you're going to go to hell if you drink a glass of wine or drink a beer. I do not think that is sinful in the sense of eternity. That's not what we're talking about right here. We're talking about the influence that a leader has upon a congregation or those that they influence, and you may be influencing somebody whose trajectory due to your influence is going to cause sinful and destructive behavior. And Paul says, because of that, then lay it down. It's not worth it. It's not worth it. Still others may be hurt because of the practice of moderation, may make their own struggle with alcohol more difficult. Love always trumps preference. Always trumps preference. We have a lot of people in our church who have been delivered from alcohol and drugs. What would it be for those people who have had negative experience due to alcohol, for their preacher to then stand up and say, hey, would you like to come have a beer with me? Would you like to come and hang out at a local restaurant and have a glass of wine with me? With people in our church who have lost everything due to addiction, lost everything due to alcohol, lost everything, maybe buried family members due to car wrecks and various things. No, sir. No, sir. I'm not doing that. It's not even a temptation for me to do that for various reasons. But I will never do that and put that on somebody. I want folks, if they come to this church and they've been freed from addiction of any kind, then I want them to know that I have their back. I'm going to support them, and I'm going to encourage them to continue to abstain from these things of the flesh. The church is about eternal issues. We are part of a church fellowship that has a century-old tradition in the Assemblies of God of abstinence from alcohol that has been gleaned from the Scriptures and practical experience. We easily forget that many converts among us have been dramatically delivered from alcoholism and its dreadful consequences for themselves and for their families. That's the reason I love the Assemblies of God. That's the reason, I say it all the time, our church isn't for everybody, but it is for me. This is the environment that I need to be in to glorify God. Let me keep going here. The second commandment, flowing directly from the first, which is to love God, is to love your neighbor as yourself. What I mean by that scripture in this context is this. As accountable citizens and as believers in society and agents of health and healing, we are responsible to critically evaluate the impact of alcohol use on our society. Approximately 17 million Americans have what many people would call alcohol use disorder. The annual cost to America society because of alcohol misuse problems is over $250 billion annually of expense that is upon our society due to alcoholism. Alcohol is a factor in 40% of the 3 million violent crimes which occur every year. 40%. So you think about the car wrecks, you think about the DUIs, you think about the jails, you think about the fines, you think about the death and destruction that is caused by this. Nearly 700,000 students are assaulted by other students, including nearly 100,000 victims of alcohol-related sexual assault and date rape that happens on college campuses due to alcohol. Consumption of alcohol beverage is known to be associated with ailments such as stroke and heart disease and pancreatitis and liver disease, immune system disorders, and various cancers. The Mayo Clinic says this right here, that you don't have to drink any alcohol if you currently don't drink. Don't start drinking for any perceived possible health benefits. In some cases, it's safest to avoid alcohol entirely. The possible benefits don't outweigh the risk. So even the Mayo Clinic would say, if you're going to be drinking for health reasons, that the risk of that outweighs any kind of positive benefit. So I'm done right here. We're about to close it down. Romans chapter 12, verse 2, the Message Bible says, don't become so well adjusted to your culture that you fit into it without even thinking. That's a very, very good way of handling this subject. To abstain means to voluntarily choose to avoid. Listen to what I just said. I'm done right here. This is the balance. This is the balance. Part 3 of this teaching, I'm balancing everything that's been said. To abstain means to voluntarily choose to avoid. It is a choice, not a commandment. Okay? It is a choice, not a commandment. The question we should ask ourselves is not, can a Christian drink, but should a Christian drink? That's the balance to this whole teaching, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you're still with me. Abstinence is the biblical choice. The Bible clearly warns of the perils of alcoholic beverages and negatively views the consumption of what the context clearly describes as a beverage with high alcohol content. It is the wisest choice. If you ask God for wisdom, He will give you wisdom. Wisdom is the application of knowledge. So when you have the knowledge before you of this subject, the wisest choice is to abstain. The tragic results of alcoholism will never come to the one who never takes the first drink. Where alcohol is avoided, drunken abuse will not pull a family apart. A church that teaches and practices abstinence should compassionately rescue those bound by alcohol, but also faithfully warn those others of its subtle dangers. Prevention is always better than the cure. Prevention is always better than the cure. Abstinence is not moral legalism, but Christian discipleship, which inherently involves self-denial and following Jesus. Abstinence is not grounded in legalism, but in the highest moral attribute of love. Again, to abstain means to voluntarily choose to avoid. It's a choice, it's not a commandment. I choose to avoid it. I choose to abstain from alcoholism. And that's what the Assemblies of God stance is. The Assemblies of God reaffirms its position of abstinence from alcoholic beverages. We do so humbly and we do so lovingly in faithful ministry to all. And our main purpose is not to try to teach people how to be moderate drinkers. Our main purpose is to try to rescue people who have been stuck in addiction, whether it's alcohol or others, and to see them set free with the glorious gospel of Jesus Christ, to never see families torn apart and ripped apart due to drinking a Budweiser or Bud Light, but to give their heart wholly to that of Jesus Christ, and to see these families strong, and to see these kids raised up in a loving family where that other stuff is not present. That's what I've dedicated my life to, and that's where we're going to stand right there. So as we close this out, I hope you've enjoyed this teaching. I know it was a little controversial, and I might have been strong with it at times, but Alcohol has really did a number on my family, and I really, come at it from a personal standpoint. But hey, listen, it's not a commandment, but it is a choice. And I hope that you've taken to heart this teaching, and I hope that you weigh it for your own self as well. We love everybody. We love you. And thank you so much for joining us in this particular series. And I hope you come back next Tuesday as we take up a brand new topic right here at the Revival Center YouTube page. Make sure you like it. Make sure you subscribe. And thank you so much. We see you next week.